Hello and welcome to Fall Through. Today, we are talking about I guess we could call it a supply chain bug? Not bug, supply chain feature that's sort of like a vulnerability in Go. And if that confused you, don't worry, we're going to get into all of that. But before we get into all of that, let me introduce my wonderful panel. So, joining me today, we have Dylan Burke, Matthew Sanabria, and as a guest host, Jamie Tanna. And so here's the thing, right? We recorded an episode with Jamie a few weeks ago, but that's not going to ship for another 3 weeks after this episode comes out. And he's just a guest on that episode. So we're going to do a little bit of an intro. So if you don't really know who he is, you get a little bit of an idea. And his more full intro is going to be in that episode. So Jamie, give a little 30-second intro to yourself.
Hey, I'm Jamie. I'm a senior software engineer at Elastic. I work on a team where we own things like supply chain security for a large part of Elastic's org. And over the last year or so, I've been building a number of tools to get insights into things like supply chain security risks. This is definitely a hot button issue to look into.
Fantastic. So let's get into what we're talking about today. So there's an article that came out from Ars Technica called Go Module Mirror Served Backdoor to Devs for 3+ years. And the quick synopsis of this is that somebody made a typo squatted, which is just like a slightly misspelled or slightly name changed version of a legitimate module for BoltDB. So they typo squatted BoltDB instead of BoltDB/Bolt. It was BoltDB-Go/Bolt. And in this version of BoltDB, they inserted a backdoor. Now, usually you'd be able to catch said backdoor because you could just go look at the source code on GitHub. Now, the thing that they did is they published the malicious version of it, pulled it through Go's module proxy, so it got tagged with a SemDB value, and it got cached indefinitely in Go's proxy cache. And then this attacker changed the tag for that version to point to a non-malicious version of BoltDB. So if you accidentally grabbed this version and you were like, oh, this is weird, but then you just went and looked at the repo and checked out the code would have looked fine. But you are actually running a backdoor version of it that would reach out to a remote server and then execute whatever commands that server told it to on your local server. So the worst kind of backdoor, a remote execution bug where someone can just hijack your machine and do whatever they'd like with it. So in this episode, we're going to talk about this vulnerability, although we technically can't call it a vulnerability because it's a feature of the module proxy. And then we're also going to talk about some wider implications this has for Go as a whole, and more or less how we're feeling about Go at the moment. So
it's not a bug, it's a feature.
Yeah.
How we're feeling about Go is very interesting because it's if you ask me and Chris how we're feeling about Go, we're probably gonna be one way. But if you ask Dylan and JB how they're feeling about Go, it's probably gonna be totally different just because of the conversation Chris and I had yesterday. So.
Yes. So also, and we're gonna tease this more at the end, but we had a pretty fantastic conversation with a really awesome guest yesterday, and that episode is going to be shipping a week from when this episode ships, and that gave both Matt and I a very interesting perspective on Go as a language and how we feel about it and what we want to do with it in the future. But first, let's talk about this vulnerability that's not a vulnerability. Yeah, so who wants to go first?
I'll open with that. So I think in the abstract, the Go module proxy and the Sum database were built and published with good intentions. Before we had modules, we had GOPATH. Essentially, you git cloned everything into a special folder, and all of your builds used whatever happened to be at that path. Made versioning really hard. It made using two different versions of the same dependency difficult. So we got modules. The proxy protocol is significantly more efficient than hitting GitHub using the Git API and pulling the raw Git repo and kind of to this particular issue, having the proxy in the sum database means we can't have a leftpad.go, because yanking a repo from GitHub doesn't break every consumer, because the source is cached in a zip file in the proxy with a checksum in the sum database. So you can continue to go get leftpad.go essentially forever, regardless of someone taking their ball and going home. So it went out with noble intentions. Unfortunately, because of that, proxy.golang.org and sum.golang.org have become de facto sources of truth for Go modules, when in reality, that's not what they were intended to be. And that's kind of how we got here.
I just wanted to quickly ask a question there. Like, you say that the module proxy and everything was introduced with like good intentions and whatnot, but were we having a problem with leftpad in Go? Like, was there code bases getting pulled from GitHub? I call
that out because in the original Go modules wiki and in the Vigo proposal, that's one of the wins that was called out. Was that having the module cache kind of eliminates that particular vulnerability of someone yanking their repo from GitHub.
However, I would say that we had already introduced vendoring at that point, and vendoring also prevents leftpad. Not for new people, but at least for anybody that already vendored the code.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, Git or version control in itself is like the solution there, right? Like, isn't that the whole point? If someone pulls a Linux kernel from the internet, like, we still have it.
That's fair and valid. Now, counterpoint to that, I was in a shop that had a lot of repos with a lot of vendor dependencies. And it turns into quite the explosion.
Yep.
It's kind of like in the early days of Node, when your Node modules folder contained the internet.
Early days.
It's less now.
Jamie, I feel like you were going to say something.
Yeah, I guess it's the fact that, yes, someone could have taken a copy of the Git repo before it was destroyed off the internet, but not everyone regularly goes to back up each of their dependencies and fork them and keep those forks in sync, because they're kind of hoping that things will always be there. And that is something that has bitten us time and time and time again as a profession. And even though I think we've been fortunate to avoid it within Go, there are still cases where this probably has happened, and it's been saved by the module proxy, which is kind of working as intended. It does also have some of these rough edges as well.
Yeah, I think that, one, there was a case where someone moved from GitHub to GitLab and just renamed all of their stuff. And so a bunch of people went back and retook that name and put all the repos back so that some malicious person couldn't do that. So I think that is definitely a vulnerability that exists there. But I also say there was one of the linked articles in the article from Socket about this mentioned that they did an analysis of the proxy. And what they found is of the unique module names, 95% of them started with github.com. So while I understand the desire to have this stable thing, what I don't understand, and we can get more into this later, I don't understand why Google felt the need to build something when there was already a company that GitHub can obviously handle this scale. And now that it's owned by Microsoft, and Microsoft was a big supporter of Athens, like there was already a desire to build a module proxy that GitHub could have just ran internally and could have taken care of most of this. And given the past issues with the module proxy where like SourceSot had to block their crawler because it was DOSing them so hard, it feels like this specific design of the proxy wasn't the most efficient way to go about this. And that bothers me a bit, that like not only is it that they built this thing and they built it under this ostensibly altruistic, we're going to help the community in this way. But then also it's like, but there were other viable paths. Why weren't those paths pursued? Why isn't it just open either? Like, why is it that the Go's module proxy, the proxy.golang.org is the preferred one over maybe other ones? I think that that was my kind of initial issue with the proxy as a whole. But also it feels like this is like such a small problem overall of getting left padded that it doesn't.
And Matt mentioned vendoring, and one sharp edge that we ran into is the behavior. So GoMod vendor exists. You can still vendor in modules world, but the behavior changed. In GoPath, when you had a vendor folder, go build, go test, whatever, the package resolution would start in your vendor folder. And if it wasn't there, then it would fall back to your GoPath source and so on and so forth. With modules, when you run GoMod vendor, it vendors your entire dependency tree. And if you don't have everything in your vendor folder, your builds fail.
Which I remember at my last company, we were thankfully getting rid of vendoring because we had a number of repos which use Golang CI lint as a source track dependency with Go tools as a pattern. So our dependency trees were massive and our vendor folders were massive because we had all of Golang CI lint stuff and everything else.
Where it bit us was we had a large number of internal modules that depended on lots of other internal modules. So if you have 100 services in 100 different repos that all depend on 50 other internal libraries, you end up with a vendored copy of the source for every one of your internal dependencies in every one of your services that you now have to manage. So when we first started looking at modules, it was like, can we make vendoring work like we were doing before? And it was like, no, we can't, because that's just untenable.
Yeah. And I think, too, this vulnerability, interesting, there's a comment in the Ars Technical article that links to a GitHub issue that brought up a very similar type of vulnerability over a year ago, which is also why this is kind of frustrating that someone brought this up a year ago and there was an actual live exploit that was 3 years old at that point existing there. And in that article, they brought up that, if you use a vanity URL, you can do this even more trivially, because the way that vanity, so if you have go.example.org as your module kind of domain, if you put some directives, some meta tags in the HTML, it'll tell the Go command what to do. And you can have one that's mod that will tell you where to get the module. You can have one that's called source that'll tell you how to view the source for that module. You can have another one that's for certain version control systems like Git, and it'll use Git to go get the source code for it. So you can have those point at different things. So you can have it point to a vulnerable version of your package while having the source point to a clean version of it. And you can trivially exploit this without needing to do any shenanigans with tags.
And I was going to say one thing more than that, because you as a potential bad actor have control over that whole flow, you can sniff things. So you can say, if this is coming from something that looks like a human in a browser, show them something that looks real. But if it's coming from the Go toolchain, then definitely serve them a malicious package.
Right. It's very this particular feature too. I mean, I think this is the theme that I would want to have. I feel like this falls into is paternalism from the Go team. I don't know if anybody else agrees with me on that, but it feels like this was a very paternalistic thing that aligns with a lot of the other paternalistic things. For example, semantic import versioning is also a very paternalistic standpoint. And there's been a lot of these that Go has done over the years. And I've struggled with talking about it because it is, maybe a more negative connotation thing. But I think it's something that we haven't actually like addressed as a community, whether we want this amount of paternalism, whether it's warranted. But I don't know. What do you guys feel about that?
I don't think I've ever thought of it under that term, but I've very much had lots of thoughts around the Go team being sort of, we know better than you. This is how you should do it.
I mean, that's what paternalism
yes, but
is.
Well, I've never used that term,
Right.
even mentally, but kind of, no, you're doing it wrong. You should do it the way we told you. We want you to do it instead.
Yeah.
Semantic import versioning was a big one there. And you and I have talked about it, Chris, lots of times over the years, kind of this fundamental disconnect between the way the Go build system works and the way that people think about their projects. And it's been a problem, an area of difficulty, as long as it's been around.
Right.
I think I did have to look up the meaning of paternalism at first because I wasn't sure exactly what it meant, but thank you. No, I agree. I haven't been around like Go for as long as you all have, nor have I really paid attention to the Go leadership team and the Go team during that time. I was more of a consumer of Go in my day. But now looking back, and like, from the perspective I have now, looking back, I can see like the paternalism that Chris is talking about, where it's like, we are the Go team. We know better than you. Take care, son. We love you. We're doing this for your own good. Just trust us. And it's like, no, I don't want to just trust you. I want to use the language in the way that allows me to solve my problems, not the way you want me to do it. And like, it just feels like you're constraining people on how to use the language, and you're solving problems, and I'm putting air quotes around that, right? You're solving problems that the user base maybe didn't really have, but you think they're going to have, and you're trying to protect them. It's like, I don't know. It feels like you don't need to protect us from everything. Like, you can just tell us the truth. Like, hey, left pad's a problem. Here's where we are. We're considering this approach to solving it. What do y'all think? But that's not really what happened. It was more of, we're considering this approach of solving this, and it's implemented. Have fun. The community wasn't really asked so much for how to proceed.
Another aspect of this that's always kind of bugged me is, and this is all secondhand information. So me talking to ex-Googlers and it may not be the case today, and it may not be the case across the board, but when they say Google doesn't use modules in any of their Go code, and then I'm out in the ecosystem fighting with these sharp edges, that really just has sat badly with me for years.
Yeah. Jamie, do you have thoughts on paternalism?
I mean, that point from Dylan just like skewered my argument, because I was going to say like maybe in particular, like with a module proxy, is it that Google have this problem? They kind of think that other people will have this problem as well, but they definitely have this problem, and so they are building for a solution they need. I guess then again, if they're not using modules in particular, they probably already have their own infrastructure internally as their own proxy.
Yeah, the stories that I've gotten is that they have their own internal bespoke architecture built on Blaze with existing tooling for doing mono repo air quotes wide refactors, so that breaking changes are not the same level of effort for them as it is for everyone who's using Go outside of Google. So kind of the tooling that they provided didn't actually work in a lot of cases because they didn't have to use it.
Yeah, I think that aligns with the semantic import versioning too, which is, I remember seeing the GCP Go library sitting at V0, and they were like, we're not going to go to V1. Like that always struck me as one of those, if you as the Go team can't convince people in your own company that they should do this, why are you trying to sell it to the rest of us? Why not only are you trying to sell it to us, but when all of us are telling you, or so many of us are telling you, hey, this doesn't work, why is it that you keep telling us, no, it works, we're sure it works, it definitely works? I think that's just like, it's so frustrating. It's frustrated me for years.
I think this has to do with the way they receive feedback or solicit feedback from the community. They have this approach where they like do random sampling of telemetry and surveys, and I don't think they're getting the sample that they think they are, right? They're not really getting a representation of the entire community. And Chris, you and I spoke briefly about this yesterday, about in the context of like Windows builds for Go and whatnot. And they like that, the community went on their own way and like supported Windows with Go, and the Go team, if you were to ask the Go team if Windows support's important, they'd be like, no, nobody responded, but the community did respond. You just didn't like find them. You know what I mean? And I think there's some aspect of that here with the way the Go team delivers features to the language. You're asking some sample size that's really not as representative of the community as you think it is. And I think that's part of where the problem comes from.
I've heard that same rant from Chris multiple times over the years. Kind of that sample is self-selected. So it's 85% of the portion of the Go community who chose to send us telemetry, or who chose to click through the link and fill out the survey. So it's not as accurate. Another point that's come up over the years is that there's a large amount of proprietary internal Go code that the Go team has no insight into because it's private. Internal companies don't necessarily work the same way that some random person doing a hobby project on GitHub does.
Yeah. So before we move, because I think there's this is leading to a broader conversations. Before we get into that, what do you guys think of, like, maybe what are the mitigations for this direct problem?
Can I ask a quick question about this direct problem first?
Yeah.
We mentioned the vanity URL side of things, and I haven't like personally set up a vanity URL for the module proxy. Is that the same as hosting your own module proxy, or are they separate things? Okay.
So yeah, vanity URLs are specifically just like you give your module name your own custom domain, so foo@example.com, and then at that domain, when you do an HTTP GET request with a go get equals 1 as the query parameter,
go_get equals 1.
Yeah, so it'll send the go command will send that as a query to you, and if you respond to it with these either HTTP. Can you do HTTP headers, or is it just HTML? I don't remember, but you can basically respond to it with at least HTML meta tags that give directives of
where to find this stuff.
Yeah, you can be like, use this module proxy. Here's, if you're using Git, go here. If you're using SVN, go here. If you're using, whatever else, go here. And then if you want to view the source, here's how you can view the source for, this particular package or this particular file. Yeah. So there's just directives in HTML.
There's very little documentation, official documentation about vanity URL proxies.
Right.
There's a couple of blurbs, there's a few examples, but in effect, that's it. At CrowdStrike, we had an internal one, and it was literally a single Nginx deployment, completely in the YAML config file.
Jamie gave a good example of this at openapi.tanna.dev. So if you want, or /go/validator. So if you want to see that, listener, please open that up.
Essentially, you respond to an HTTP GET for your module's path with an empty HTML body with some meta tags that tell the Go command where to go get the source.
Yeah.
For various aspects of that.
So the question I then wanted to really ask here was, this vulnerability is also possible on people hosting their own module proxy. You can theoretically do it there too, because it was a problem in how the service responded. Like the module proxy service would, ingest a new module, serve it to you, cache it, and then someone can just change the source code out from under you later on. And that's not a problem with just Google's module proxy that they're hosting, but if you hosted your own, it could be a problem there too.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a fundamental flaw in the design of this system, because that's why the episode is titled "When Supply Chain Attack Mitigations Go Wrong." Well, that's at least the tentative title. We'll see if we keep that title. But the reasons we're considering that for title is because the reason it works like this is because the goal was that once you published a version of a module, that you wouldn't be able to go back and change the source code of that module. That's why it caches it indefinitely. So you can't have people go vet it and then swap it out with something new underneath and have people consume something malicious.
In effect, from a certain point of view, throughout some Obi-Wan logic, they did accomplish that. So once you publish a version and someone pulls it through the proxy, it is checksummed, and from that point forward, the proxy will never serve you content for that version of that module that isn't the same as what it checksummed and cached.
Right.
So in a sense, it succeeded.
Yeah, they successfully mitigated that attack. They just, I wouldn't say necessarily create. No, I would say they created, right? Because if you didn't do this, when you updated the version, it would get propagated through. So at least you'd see that it's a malicious version now. So they mitigated that one, but they created this other problem of now someone can just go back and you can go and try to audit the source code, find nothing wrong. You have to audit the source code that actually gets downloaded, but that is also super duper hidden from you, and it's also like write protected, and they did all of this stuff. Once again, more paternalism, because the argument was, well, you shouldn't be modifying anything that's in the Go cache, so you're not allowed to write to these files, right? And so you have to go hunt down where your module cache is, go hunt through the thing, figure out where the source code is, and then audit the source code locally on your computer, right? So it's just it adds a lot of steps here. Jamie?
So I was going to say, this is kind of jumping ahead, but we actually had this issue recently at Elastic, where we had done a module release for one of our public modules, and someone had noticed something was a little bit off with it, and the CI job had failed. So we're like, oh, we'll unpublish the tag, we'll correct it, and then we'll republish it. And we hit a similar issue where, for some weird reason, on Go 120, which was what we were using in CI, we were getting one version of the checksum and everything was fine. Like, everything worked exactly fine. And then on a local machine with Go 123, we were failing with checksums. We're like, what's going on? Like, everything looks fine. And it was this exact thing that had happened. And we spent ages digging through and trying, literally like diffing files between what is in my Go mod cache and like copying and pasting that somewhere else. So just in case it blew that away, we at least had a backup of what the code could have looked like, and trying to work out, like, was there a supply chain attack? And it was no. We had accidentally done the supply chain attack to our consumers.
So are you telling the listeners that you're not a trustworthy maintainer? Is this what you're trying to say, Jamie?
So I'm saying that when we realized this was a thing, we retracted that specific release to make sure that it was then clear to any consumer that there was a dud release in there to not use.
So you bumped to another like version then in that case?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I was gonna say that raises a good point about like the way we view tags in the different Git tags. I'm saying specifically the way we view Git tags in the way we release different types of software, because there are like there's software out there that a tag is treated as mutable, right? That you can move it to another position or like point it somewhere else. And then there's software that treats tags more as immutable, which is kind of like the Go module, right? If I release version v100, you expect that that's always going to be v100, not like v100 plus x. And is this just a fundamental way of how we've tied these systems together, or like what do you all think is the core issue here then?
Yes. So, yes, I was going to bring that up as like my counter.
Before we pivot, I do have something. Jamie's story kind of reminded me of another kind of gripe I've had in that modules with the proxy and the way things work is very, very unforgiving of mistakes. We're human, people make mistakes, but the way things work with modules and the way tags happen and checksums, if you inadvertently publish a tag, it's burned. You cannot fix that mistake.
If you retract a version that has retractions in it, does it retract those retractions?
No.
Okay, so retractions are also if you accidentally retract something, you can't unretract it.
I haven't. I've never actually tried it. I would have to go and try it to know for sure.
I mean, security-wise, it makes sense that you wouldn't want to let people retract retracted versions because then if an attacker got access, they could retract. So,
But
See that,
you
like,
wouldn't be able to.
that is the way that you fix your mistake is you publish a new version that contains a retraction for the version that you didn't mean to publish.
Right.
the thing is, with the retraction, you can still download that version again. So it doesn't prevent you from downloading it. It just says when you download it, whoa, you probably shouldn't be using this. Please don't use it.
It'll also make it disappear from your at latest version resolution.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This is just making me like agree with what Chris and I spoke about previously. Like,
yes,
bring hashtag bring back GOPATH. Like, let's just solve these problems again. I'm done.
Back. So, like, here's the thing too. I think that so the problem here, the root of all of this problem, I think, is what you brought up, Matt, which is that tags, no matter what system you use, whether it's Git or anything else, tags are always mutable because they are pointers. They are not constants. They are pointers. They point to something. And that thing that they are pointing at is not immutable. This is different from, say, content addressing, right? There's a reason why in Git, the canonical way to find a commit is not by a tag or by a branch, but by its commit SHA, because the commit SHA is a content addressed identifier. So you cannot have the same commit SHA with different commit contents. And you could have easily built this entire system on top of content hashed IDs. So when you publish a new version, the proxy would just take it and make a hash, and that's an identifier. And you could have built all of the SemVer stuff you want on top of that. And someone else could have built that, and they could have built in all of the features that you want to have. We'd have multiple dependency resolution things that will handle it in whatever way that you want to handle it. And the only thing the Go command would have to worry about is what is the list of content addressed modules that you want me to go get. And that would have avoided both the ability to, it would have mitigated both of these attacks, right? It would have made this it would have eliminated this problem as a whole, and it would have been simpler to implement overall. You could have also done things like detect when two modules are exactly the same, or really it would have been better if we did this with packages instead of modules, but you would have been able to detect when two things are exactly the same, and you would have been able to not just see vulnerabilities in like a specific tag, but see vulnerabilities in specific content hashes. Like, it would have been overall a more secure system. However, there was this insistence that we had to build something on top of SemVer because that's what everybody else uses. And I think that was a critical point where Go could have done the Go thing, like it did with GoFumped and with so many other things, where it could have introduced a new paradigm to the industry that would have shifted probably how everybody else does it. And we had much stronger supply chain security across the board as people started adopting this. But instead of doing that, Go said, well, we're just going to do what everybody else did. And I think that is the thing that bothers me about this and modules as a whole and so many of these things, is that the language that I came to 13 years ago was a language that kind of stuck its ground about things and said, we're trying to innovate. We really care about what's best for making software, not necessarily these little maybe syntactic things you don't get or these things that other languages have. We want to make it productive for as many people as possible. And I think that has worn away. And what has happened is people are listening. The Go team is listening to the masses, right? They're listening like, oh, we got to get generics. Oh, we got to fix error handling. We got to do all of these little things. And I'm like, none of that is a real problem. Like, yeah, we didn't have generics. We're the cloud language. We got to be the cloud language without having generics, without having changed if error does not equal nil. We did all of this successfully. And yet there's still this need or desire because, people are complaining about this too much. And it's like, if people don't like if error does not equal nil, then go write a different language, right? Like, then don't go, like, that's the thing that people have seemed to refuse to say. It's like, if you don't like this, there's other languages that maybe have a better error handling model. And people are like, well, I want these other features of Go. It's like, well, that's the trade-off then. If you want these other features of Go, then just suck it up and deal with the error handling. But by trying to appease people, we've turned Go into just, what's the difference between Go and TypeScript at this point? Like, what is, like, it's not as compiled? It's not, like, I don't really...
We don't have a good type system.
Well, yeah, and like our type system's not as good as TypeScript's. Like, and that's the thing of like, what's the difference between at this point using Go versus like TypeScript versus Ruby versus JavaScript versus Python versus any of these languages? There used to be a thing, like, you can't say that about Rust, right? There's clearly a thing that Rust has that makes it distinct from everything else. Zig is the same, and Go used to be the same, but Go is not that anymore.
We'll say the SemVer point you make struck a chord with me, going way back, well before my time being a gopher, and that we used to have raging debates with product management around the idea that there is a semantic difference between the versions of the source code that you're assembling and the version of the released product that you're sending to your customers. Those are similar things, but they are fundamentally different. And conflating the two it has to be going on 15 years now. I've been having this debate across various companies and in 4 different languages now. That conflating kind of the commit hash of this library, bubbling that up to the version of your product, it creates these impedance problems where, like, semantic keyword versioning kind of brought it up again, where there are a lot of things out there where your marketing department wants to release the next version and they want to call it V2. But
yeah,
that doesn't have anything whatsoever to do with the ABI compatibility of your source code, which is what the SemVer of Go modules is equated to.
Right. Jamie, in the notes you have this. Jamie has a great hot take looking emoji highlighted.
So just before that, I was going to say, like, not a throwback, but also a future throw, because it's the episode that hasn't come out yet.
Yes.
I'm surprised that we still have content to talk about versioning. Like, I'm sure we spent the whole conversation just talking about versioning, and we're still coming out with takes. So yeah, my hot take is around like how we could have solved this. Like, what is the problem? And it's something that I don't really wholeheartedly agree with. But it's that old Go proverb of a little copying is better than a little dependency. Because if you had just copied the whole of BoltDB into your own code base instead of taking on a dependency for it, you wouldn't have had a supply chain attack because you wouldn't be pulling in a dependency from somewhere else.
Because there is no chain.
I mean, this is one of the things that I think, ironically, the thing that frustrated people about GoPath was that if you wanted to have stable dependencies, you did have to like vendor, basically. And that frustrated people a lot because they're like, oh, I have to vendor all this code. I'm vendoring so much code. And I'm like, that should have been the point at which the language as a whole was like, you have too many dependencies, right? If you're complaining about how much code that you're vendoring and it's a pain, that probably means that A, you are not auditing this code, and that B, you probably are pulling in way more than you need to, and you should rethink what it is that you are pulling in or the approach that you are taking. And that was actually a really strong stance of Go for a while. And I think that did really well for us as a community because we just, you did have dependencies, but those dependencies were almost always very high quality, right? Because they kind of had to be. And those maintainers, it was tough as a maintainer having to deal with this versionless world where you're always pulling from tip basically, and that can be kind of frustrating, and not having the version numbers and anything like that. But I do think that gave a lot of power to be like, okay, well, I just got to be very smart about this, and if I do want to do a new thing, I can either pick a new name, or I can use something like gopackage.in that would do like the V2 for you, and the V3 that would do that for you. Like there's a plethora of different ways to handle this, and the maintainer got to choose for themselves how they wanted to handle this. And one of my big issues for maintainers when modules came out is that it gave so much more burden to maintainers and how they could actually do their build their code and all of that. Like modules just came in and blew things up for maintainers to make it easier for consumers. And that,
as a maintainer of a fairly widely used GitHub project that was already at version 4.x when modules was introduced, yes.
Yeah.
It was a dumpster fire to try to opt into Go modules for something that was already at a version higher than 0.
Yeah. And I think the one of the things I really want to point out, 'cause I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but like modules it's been extremely rough from the beginning, right? I think as a quick review of the timeline of maybe the more pessimistic timeline of modules, right? Like for those that don't know, this whole we need reproducible builds thing started back in, I think, want to say 2015, 2016 time. And at that time, the Go team put together this committee of people. And that committee of people started working on, okay, how can we solve this dependency management problem? How can we get reproducible builds? And at that time, there were like 3 or 4, maybe 5 different dependency management tools that are floating out in the ecosystem. That committee successfully came up with basically a spec, wrote a tool called dep, reunited all of the other tools, so they all became dep compatible, basically deprecated all those tools so everybody was moving forward on dep. The Go team had specified this as an official experiment without really defining it that well. And then at one point, the dep team was told, okay, this experiment is over. Thank you for your work. They archived the dep repo, said, we're done with this. We're doing this thing called Vigo, which is what became modules. Goodbye. Right. And it was an abrupt end. And the community was like, yo, we are all standardizing on dep. Like, what do you mean there's this new, completely different thing? And that, they can decide to do what they want there. But the problem was that this Vigo thing, this module thing, was just not ready yet. None of the tooling had been updated. It didn't support workflows that people were using regularly. For instance, you couldn't have multiple modules in the same repo. That would break things a lot. Because of the way modules worked in this module cache thing, you also had a hard time if you had multiple repos in your company working on them at the same time. You had to resort to a lot of hacks to make that happen. It took years before we got what is now the replace directive that would kind of automatically reroute where a dependency was sourced from. But then you'd also have problems if you committed that. So you had to make sure you didn't commit that, which made your committing steps more difficult. And then it was more years before we got the workplace, which kind of more or less fixed this problem. So we had to add many, 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 many patches. Meanwhile, the tooling was still broken for a long time. A lot of the tools that people used just didn't work with modules because they expected GOPATH. And then once we got semantic import versioning, the tools that we'd fixed broke again because they were doing things like automatically importing V1, which, as you mentioned, Dylan, if you had a library that's been at V4 for years, why is it pulling in this ancient V1 version by default? Because of how semantic import versioning was designed. So modules has been this journey of like stumble after stumble after stumble after stumble that has made it extremely hard for people to maintain libraries in the Go ecosystem. And it's also taken up a gigantic amount of work from the Go team, right? Having to rewrite all these tools, fix all these tools, trying to educate all of the people, having to sit in Slack and answer question after question after question after question after question, having to do all of this work to get us this modules thing. What we could have spent all that time doing instead is working on the language itself, improving the language, right? We could have, as I mentioned, like one of the ideas I had is like, why didn't we just go with the bill of materials model? Why isn't that the compiler doesn't spit out hashes of all of the packages it used? And then you can do with that what you will. That would have been an easy solution to the reproducible build problem. You build a tool on top of that takes all those hashes, make sure all of your dependencies match those hashes. If it doesn't, it warns you. You can have some database, you go grab what you need, you build it, bam, reproducible build. Didn't need to add any of this, could have left GOPATH alone and gotten what we wanted, and that would have been a quick and easy solution.
It's humans. Honestly, it's because humans are in the loop. To be completely honest with you, right? It's because humans are in the loop. Like, all of this was done, right? Module proxy to solve problems that humans thought other humans had, but really didn't really have to that extent to be solved. You know what I mean? Or could have taken, like you said, an alternative approach to solve these problems and taken more time rather than saying, oh, Dep, you're gone. We're going to doing this. Or rather than saying, oh, Go module proxy is the way, use it. Instead of like rushing to implement these things because they thought humans had that problem, they could have like spent more time understanding what the community is doing. And then like from the versioning perspective, yeah, I would love to see hashes everywhere. I really would. I would love to see like, oh, this is the exact code I'm using. It's irrefutable. But humans don't like hashes. They can't read them. They have no idea. Like if you take two hashes, they have no idea if this hash is a previous version of that hash or like any ordering. They can't order the hashes correctly. So I think that's a fundamental problem of why versioning is difficult in this software industry. But we could spend time thinking about this and working around it and making it better. But I agree that we need some sort of hashing.
I'll point out that, like, once again, Git solved this, right? Like, we don't look at commit shaws most of the time. You have branches that will tell you, here's the history of this whole version, and it's all it's a hash chain, so that all of the previous versions contain the next versions contain the previous versions. That gives you both that supply chain security you can have, because you can't change the ID of something. You can't change the history of something without changing its ID. And then you can also have a nice little identifier. You can have tags that are nice little identifiers. And then you can have Merkle tree databases and all of this that say, okay, well, this hash changed, so we got to warn everybody about that. And maybe that's something you care about. Maybe it's not. But it's like, we could have built the nice numbers on top of whatever else it is. And it would have allowed you to do any versioning scheme you want. Maybe you don't want to do SemVer. Maybe you just want to do a year-based thing or something else, or a name-based thing. It would have allowed so many more options. And these are all designs that we have had already. Right. But it's like, we didn't go with them because I think it was decided, well, most people will want versions. Most people want things to look at this. I think it's a tyranny of the masses in a way, or tyranny of the majority, where it's like, well, what is the thing that most people want? Which is just never a good way to run any sort of community thing, because you're gonna, tyranny of the majority and tyranny of the minority are both problems, and I think you have to figure out ways to mitigate them, and that's leadership. And I think that's what was missing at this point.
I have a little bit of a tangent I want to explore.
Okay.
Jamie reminded me, or made me think of it, with his a little bit of copying comment. So back to the original vulnerability. One of the things that's come up is, what can we do about it? So you can go, if you have, for whatever reason, you have a project that references this bad typo squatted bolt DB. The proxy will continue to tell you everything is fine. The easiest way to fix it is to do go proxy equals direct, or to use go private. There are several different ways, but essentially tell the go command to skip the proxy for this repo and do a go mod download, or a go build, or a go test. It will go directly to source, pull the commit that is tied to the version number that you have, and see that the checksum no longer matches, and you'll get a build error. So that's the direct way to go solve the problem and mitigate the vulnerability for yourself. My problem with it, though, is that requires proactive manual effort by every consumer for every code base downstream. And that's just not tenable at human scale.
Yeah.
Kind of, even basic projects are going to have a dozen dependencies. More complicated things may have hundreds of dependencies. And it's just not feasible to go and vet the source code of every commit of every one of your 763 transitive dependencies.
Yeah.
And for instance, like that's partly why as well we are going through a central thing, is to try and shift some of the load somewhere. And yes, we should probably have more central proxies that people are using. Like organizations should be trying to run their own as a way of getting a little bit more confidence.
Yeah.
But then there are also spaces for external products and services and things. So for instance, Socket, who found the vulnerability or found the malicious package, they have a really good product, which this isn't sponsored. But yeah, like the product's really good, and they do a lot of that sort of independent checking where they will, as things hit upstream package registries, they'll go and check and see if things are looking suspicious. Because yes, like if every single person has to do that, we don't have enough hours in the year to do that, just on what we've already got, let alone all the new releases.
And the thing about hashes too, that I'll say, my hash idea, is that it also allows you to have auditors. So let's say we don't do this in Go, but let's say you could ship a binary in Go, like a binary library. You used to be able to do this. You can't do this anymore. But if you could have an independent auditor or have multiple independent auditors that come in and say, we have audited the code for this hash and it is A-OK. And then you can use that to do distributed trust, and you don't have to say, oh, I have to go look at it. You can say, oh, well, these independent auditors that are, certified or whatever that we can trust have audited this code. And now there's nothing the company can do to muck with that. So it's just like a content address. You can't change it. And that could really have bolstered the supply chain as a whole, because expecting people to actually go in and read all of the code themselves is not feasible. It's never been feasible. But we do need a way to actually audit the supply chain. And the way that we're doing it now is just not it. Like, this is just not it.
We do this in TLS essentially, right? We're basically saying, oh, you issuer have verified that whoever is asking for this cert owns the domain or whatever,
Right.
owns the property. We're doing this today with like delegating trust. So I don't see why we couldn't do it for source code. And I was going to ask Jamie, because he brought up in the notes, go some DB direct, then go proxy direct, and all these things. I was going to ask, like, are you using those in your projects? Is that like how are you doing this today, or is this just recommended based on this vulnerability?
So, at least at Elastic, we haven't completely decided, but we are discussing changing up our CI images and making it so we are setting everything to be a more resilient and secure setup by default, which isn't the defaults in all the containers that we get. But as a way of giving us that additional protection. Yeah.
That makes sense. And I want to ask, like, the group, really, two questions. One, do you think we've made it kind of too easy to fetch dependencies without having to do any sort of verification, right? Like, go get food at example.com, whatever. You can just fetch the dependency and you don't even know, God knows what's in that dependency. Do you think we've made it too easy? And then the second part of that question is, like, should we as engineers, like, should we do more to vet our dependencies, and how does that, like, even look like?
The paranoid curmudgeon in me says absolutely yes to the first one. It's too easy. But that's, as a counterpoint to it, that's part of what facilitated, at least to some extent, the community growing, is that it is easy to get started in Go. It's for greenfield code where you're doing something. It is very easy to go create a directory, go mod init, type some code, go mod tidy, and go run, and it works. It's very, very straightforward and easy to use. It's a great story for that scenario. Where it breaks down is the stuff we've been talking about today. Long-term code maintenance, dealing with vulnerabilities, dealing with human error and tags landing in the wrong place, dealing with cache eviction problems. This is, in a bit of irony, this is one of the classic problems in computer science. It's a cache eviction problem. if
Yeah.
the proxy and the SemDB would have cache eviction and TTLs and would force things to go revalidate, the vulnerability would have been discovered. But at the same time, no one wants to have to do that. So to your second point, I don't know. That's hard.
I was going to ask, like, I'd consider us in this call, like, you know, good software engineers, good technologists in general, right? Like, we're here, we care about this stuff, we're doing our best to spread awareness. But, like, I'll be honest with you, when I go, quote unquote, audit code, I did the exact thing that this vulnerability exploited, right? I see that my Go project has version 100 of some dependency, and I see that in my code. And when I want to go look at that code, where did I go? I went to GitHub. And that was not guaranteed to be the code that Go was serving me, right? But that's exactly what I did. And I thought I was doing due diligence on my part and saying, oh yeah, I'm using version 100. GitHub shows this, looks good. I wasn't doing anything else and comparing whether or not the Go proxy served me the right code or this. I wasn't doing anything else. So like, if engineers like us are doing this, who else is doing this?
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like,
as gophers, we've kind of been conditioned to think that way. Like the module path is github.com/example/foo, and you look at the version and you go to GitHub and you look at the source, and those are equivalent. And kind of that's the way everyone thinks of it. And like you said, that is the gap in human thinking that they took advantage of here to have this, to take advantage of this vulnerability.
It feels like it's a disconnection between, like, so I would say that one of the beautiful things about the way that Go packages and now modules work is that you don't have to depend on a central authority to maintain these names, right? Like with almost every other thing, like you can just name squat on something. You can, once you get a name, you get it. But like if that organization ever goes away, your entire language is screwed, right? Like, so you have to make sure that you maintain control of that forever, indefinitely. And if something ever goes wrong, you have to retool so much of how you use the language. And with Go, that's not a thing. It's decentralized. It depends on DNS, right? As long as you maintain a DNS name, you're good to go. But I think that, and also, like, you know, we didn't expect people to have tons of dependencies in Go. That's why we have the Go proverb of a little copying is better than a little dependency. And I think that the transition has been to that model where you do have some central authority, except we don't have a central authority. So you tried to put a model on top of the central authority when there isn't one. And I just don't think that's ever going to work. I think you have to fundamentally change how Go does imports in order to make this world that the Go team seems to desire now actually function in the way they want it. And I think that would just break a lot of things. I don't know if you could do it. But I think it'd be a bad path to go down in general.
Yeah,
I think also I want to say that, like, a big problem with Go modules is that it made a decisive choice about how people should do things and bake that straight into the language. So even if you wanted to do things differently, it's painful. I mean, as we've just mentioned, you got to go set some environment variables to make the Go command not use Google's proxy. It's like, why is Google choosing what proxy I should use? Why do I have to do all these workarounds to not use that thing? Once again, paternalism. Like, why should I trust you? Why do I have to trust you? Why by default am I trusting you? Where have you earned that trust? Like, well, I can't see that source code. They don't release the source code for, oh, maybe, no, they do, right? They do release the source code for the proxy.
Well,
yeah, I think so.
Technically,
ahead, Jamie, yeah.
But who knows what's actually running that? That's one of the problems.
Are you actually running that? Do we have independent auditors saying that you're really running that code, or are you running something else?
Like, guys,
there is a GitHub repo that you can look at that has
there's a commit at the bottom of the web page. Yeah,
I know, but like, and it's not so much that like I think Google's doing something nefarious here. I want to be very clear. I do not think Google is doing something nefarious, but it's also, once again, it gets back to that paternalism. It's like you're forcing me to trust you, which seems unfair to the community as a whole, because nobody else can do that, right? There's other giant companies that contribute huge. I mean, once again, the proxy is just piggybacking off of GitHub at this point. And it's like, well, why is it that I trust them? Like, why can't I trust them instead of trusting you, Google? Like,
to your point about centralized authorities, the reason we built built the vanity URL proxy at CrowdStrike and put that in place is because internally we switched VCS providers.
Yeah.
From what to what didn't matter, but the actual VCS URLs for the source code changed. And without a vanity URL proxy in place, your module names in your source code are tied directly to your VCS paths.
If you go to proxy.golang.org, you will see Built with Love by Google and the commit SHA and source Trust Me Bro at the bottom. Okay? You will see all listener, viewer, you will not see that. I'm just messing with you.
This is fine.
Wait, I mean, you bring up a good point,
in the
though.
background.
It's a very good point, though. If I'm forced to trust you by default, the path of not trusting you is more burdensome because I have to do something on my end and change my builds, right? I change my stuff, and like I can't verify that you are serving me the correct code of the module proxy. It's I bring it back to the TLS thing, right? Where if I connect to your server, you're gonna serve me TLS certs, and I get to verify that with those certs I have in my trust chain. I get to complete the chain of trust and do that. And like, sure, you could be a malicious server that got access to someone's valid certs and serving it. Of course you could, but like, that's a different problem. That's a completely different problem. That's like me giving you my car keys and be like, oh, sorry, you stole my car. Like, oh well, but it's just like you can verify that the TLS cert that you're connecting to or the service you're connecting to is giving me this cryptographic thing back. How do I do that for the proxy? For
A
Go's
bit
proxy?
of an ironic twist. Almost everyone is using TLS to connect to the proxy.
Yeah, this is true.
And I will say, like, I guess in a way, this has been a violation of trust here, in that the thing that I trust is canonical, which is GitHub, and the way that you frame this to me is as a proxy or a cache, which are two words that indicate you are not the source of truth. You have served me something that is not the source of truth, right? You've served me an incorrect thing based on what I think a normal expectation would be, right? Like my expectation is if I go look at the code in GitHub, that's the code that we get back. And like, that's not what's happening. And I think that those are the types of problems that come up in this conversation has. And it's like, why are we even in this position in the first place? Like, I don't know. It just frustrates me that all of these years have been spent on trying to get this, like, and just doubling down and doing sunk cost fallacy on modules and really trying to make modules work. And it's like, is there a point? Is there a thing that will make the Go team back out of this? Or is this just completely like double down until the language is basically dead?
Kind of like you were saying, the fact that it was baked into the core behavior of the language, I kind of think that, at least to some extent, we're stuck. Like, unless we get GoTo
Or fork.
it's not going to change.
Oh no!
Or someone forks Go.
Is this the beginning of the Go fork? Oh no!
Oh no!
Brian Cantrell, where are you? I need your blessing.
Brian!
No, I what you said, Chris, really struck a chord with me about like the wording that we're using to describe this stuff. Proxy, caching. It comes back to a language thing, not a programming language thing, but like a terminology meaning of language thing. Proxy, by definition, means I'm going to request this resource or get this resource on your behalf, right? I'm not, like you said, I'm not the source of truth. I'm going to get it for you. And then there's a kind of an implicit trust there where if I make a subsequent request to a proxy and the source of truth has changed, you should fetch the new source of truth for me. You should do that because you are proxying and you know what I want. Same thing with caching. Like if you want to then hold the source of truth in a cache so that you can serve future requests faster or whatever, that's great. But then you now have to take on the responsibility of when the source of truth changes, you should update your cache. And it's like both proxy and cache, if you ask the average like engineer how those should work, the proxy, the Go proxy doesn't work that way, right? Like even in a basic read through cache like architecture, the whole point of read through cache is I want to get the actual value from the backend storage system, then you cache it. But if that value ends up changing, you're supposed to update your cache. And it's like you just broken both of the ways we think about proxy and caching. And you just said it's fine. You know what I mean? Like you're just like, do it. It's fine. Trust me, bro.
Definitionally, the fact that
another detail that and it just hit me while you were talking. It's also a leaky abstraction in the sense that if you're hitting proxy.golang.org asking for a particular version, it'll return you that cached version. But the proxy protocol, the API that the Go command talks to, supports a list endpoint to say, for this module, what versions are available. It doesn't return you the list of versions in the cache. It delegates to the backing VCS store and gets the list of versions from there.
Yeah, so it could lie to you, essentially. Technically.
So there isn't an API, and I may be misspeaking, but it's one way or the other. It's been a few years since I was dealing with it, but the question we were trying to answer is which versions are in the cache, because we were running an internal cache. It happened to be Athens, but the question was which versions are cached, and the default implementation, if I'm remembering correctly, is that when you ask for the list of versions, it goes to source control and queries that for the list that it returns you, not the list of versions that are in the cache.
Chris, you had a response to what I was saying, and I think we should just title this episode "How Mad Can We Make Chris to Make Him Go on His Monologues?" Because we're just keeping you fired up. I love it.
Wait, I don't. What was? Remind me of what you said, because I
just saying about the wording of proxy and caching.
Here's the thing, right? It was never a proxy or a cache, because it was immediately like, oh, if we take this thing and we save it, and then our intention is to never change it. And I'm like, but that's not, if the thing behind it changes and you're saying you're not changing, then you are not a cache. You're just a new origin. You're just a different origin under the auspices of saying you're a cache or a proxy.
But Chris, they in a wiki, they put a note that said, don't ever move a tag once you publish it.
It's like the silliness of this whole situation, from like, you built this thing that's just a weird proxy in front of GitHub that it's not actually a proxy, where you're trying to like usurp control over people's repositories in ways that are unintuitive, while trying to say that you're actually protecting the consumers from the people that are. It's just like this whole argument. It's like, it feels like they wound up in an alternate reality, and they're like, yeah, no, this is reality. And then they just kind of kept going.
What do you think?
For the audio listeners, there's visible smoke coming off of Chris's head.
Yeah, do we think that off the back of this, there may actually be meaningful change in that decision to not revalidate?
I mean, the problem is that now the big problem is like, no matter what you do, you have this window where you could have this change happen. So you have to figure out how you do revalidation, but you also, like, when it comes to vanity URLs, you're just stuck, because you have to identify yourself not as a regular browser, but as this. So you'd have to do like vanity URLs as a regular browser, but then you could also just put like Cloudflare block control in front of it. So then Cloudflare will tell you if it's a bot or a real user. So it's like, there's all of this work that you have to do to try and get around it. But there's just this fundamental problem of like, you're trying to pretend you're the source of truth when you're not, and you're telling people you're the source of truth when you're not. And it's like, I don't think that we actually ever needed a cache to serve us this stuff in the first place. Like, I think the SumDB is a good idea. Like, give me, like, if that's all this was, where it's like, okay, give me all of the hashes that have been pegged to a tag and tell me what all of them are and put it in chronological order of when you got those and report to me. And then if there's some problem, bring it up to me, right? If the same version has multiple tags, bring it up to me, but also have some avenue where, like with what you guys did, where, oh, we've published the wrong tag, be able to put something in either the Git repo or have some special channel you can go through to be like, actually, this version was wrong. This is the correct version, right? But there's just so much paternalism in the design of this. There's so much. Not only do we know better for you, but this is the one true way. And anybody else that wants to do it has to go down this really rough path. It just, I mean, to put it in another phrasing, it kills diversity, right?
Yeah.
Like you cannot do versioning in any other way besides SemVer. You are not allowed to innovate. You're not allowed to change. It's baked into the language, and that is that, and that's what you can deal with.
But it's not even SemVer. It's not even SemVer. So
Well,
if
yes.
it's their version of SemVer, it's what they support. You can't actually publish a tag for your Go module that contains like a pre-release or a build or whatever, like metadata after the SemVer tag, unless that metadata is like plus incompatible or whatever their source code allows. We ran into that at Oxide, where we were trying to publish a version of our Go SDK where like the SDK itself was versioned, major, minor patch, but we wanted to put metadata after that contained like the ID or the version of the upstream like OpenAPI spec that it was built against, right? So that way at a glance you can see, oh, I'm using this version of the SDK and this is the OpenAPI spec it was built against. We published that tag and we're like looking at Go modules, like the package.go.dev, and we're like, where's our new tag? What's going on? Nothing, like no information, no way to get errors, no way to get logs, no way to get anything. And we're just sitting there
in
like,
a sense,
what?
In a sense, it does support it because they'll parse those tags with build info, but they mangle them. They immediately translate them into the pseudo version tag with the timestamp and the commit hash.
Which is like, I don't want that. I want my tag. I don't, Kind
of like you were saying earlier, Matt, like humans don't think in terms of hashes.
Right.
Yeah. I think, too, this is a place where, like, I wish we as an industry didn't have to learn the same thing over and over and over again, because this is kind of what the web went through for a bit, where the standards committees of the web started building these, like, really big features. Like, the first time that we tried to do offline apps on the web, they had, well, I think it was called App Cache or App Manifest or something, but it was this giant unwieldy thing that was super awkward and kind of aimed for the most often case of how people might build something. It was terrible. And the lesson that people learn from that is like, oh, we just need to build a bunch of small features and hand them to people and allow them to construct the bigger thing they want for themselves. And that has allowed the web to just thrive in ways that it never could before. We can do incredible things on the web because the web standards bodies stopped being so paternalistic and started being like, oh, you need this feature? Here you go. And they've even said, okay, you need lower level stuff? Sure, like with video, right? You have access now to the codecs of the browser, so you can encode and decode video on your own. You can implement your own video codecs and WebAssembly and encode and decode things on your own, which is something you could never do before, because they said, you know what, we're going to give people tools that they can use. We're going to specify those tools really well. And we're going to say, if you need something bigger, here's how you can put these things together. And then other people can go and put those things together into bigger packages, and people can use it. And you have this very diverse ecosystem of different ways of doing things, thinking about things, but also the ability to innovate. And that just is lacking here. Like if you wanted to do a source software bill of materials with Go, it would be so difficult because you'd be fighting against all the tooling. You'd have to make up your own stuff, and the tooling would just kind of keep trying to go back to this other thing that it's doing. Whereas they could have built this in a way where it's like, if you want to use this modules, you can use it. But if you want to use some other form of packaging, you can go use that. And what the most ironic thing about this is that Google as a company uses their own version of packaging, as does most of these large companies. So it's not like this is foreign. It's just like the thing that gets shipped is just like incompatible. So you got to throw away the whole Go toolchain and go use the really low level awkward stuff yourself if you want to build a solution that doesn't depend on modules. And then you're just, SOL when it comes to like being able to use any of the other stuff. It's just super frustrating that we're here, and like maybe Go will be able to make it through. But honestly, at this point, I'm kind of tired of Go.
I have a title for this episode now.
Okay.
Patching paternalistic proxies or something along those lines. Something along those lines. You can get a little alliteration there, whatever, all that stuff, right? That's alliteration when you use the
patching paternalistic proxies.
Yeah, I think it might be it. But
patching
it makes
problems with paternalistic proxies.
Yes, yeah. Even better. So it makes me think though, like, is this a problem elsewhere, right? Like the Go module proxy is not the only way we download software, right? We have like the Docker registry, which I think doesn't have this problem because you do push an image there, I think.
Right.
And then you have like the Terraform registry, which I think may have this problem because it does proxy downloads, I think. But it spawns the question, is this same vulnerability like present in other software systems? And I don't know the answer to that. I'm just like, posing the question, and I'll do some research after this podcast.
I feel like in something like Docker, though, if you change a tag, doesn't it repull and rebuilds?
So you can tags are completely mutable.
Right.
So you can just keep repushing them. Which, for instance, like the latest tag is just a magic tag that you can keep repushing. But with Docker, you can at least pin to a digest, which doesn't change.
Yeah.
So that isn't immutable for that thing.
Kind of like you were saying, tags are pointers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
However, like Docker, one of the difficulties there is so you could have like image at latest at shard checksum.
Yeah.
But that latest gets ignored in that case. So you can actually pretend that you're giving someone latest, but it's actually a malicious tag that you managed to push elsewhere. And someone just thinks, it's latest, so it's this valid thing. So there's lots of different things there that you can also get people in trouble with.
Yeah, we ran into some issues, but they were more around kind of unofficial agreement to never use latest. And to reference a specific version, and then there's kind of community agreement to that you don't move tags for kind of these published versions. Similar to what we do with Go, but kind of as a citizen of the Docker ecosystem, don't move tags and break your consumers. Other than latest. Latest is kind of assumed to be a floating tag for whatever your most current stable thing is, or your most current thing. So I've seen latest and stable as variants also.
It's just funny. We suck at this as an industry. Like we just suck because, in the Docker sense, it's like we support moving tags, but please don't. And then Go is like, we don't support tags. Whatever you gave us the first time is it. And then like GitHub Actions is V1. Yeah, bro, let's float it to the top with every other V1 release or whatever. It's like, what are we doing? We're just confusing ourselves of how, like we're conflating the use of tags for pointing to commits and tags to reference a release. And we're just conflating the whole use of how we even use tags.
I think the problem here is that we have this desire, right, to be able to, at a low level, go look at something and understand it, right? That's why we don't want to use hashes, because we want to be able to like look at the manifest and understand what it's saying. But like all of this could have been solved with tooling, right? All of this, and we could have broadened the language, and we should probably do this across the industry of like not just saying, okay, here's the content, like not just saying, oh, here's the hashes, but like give me more information about that. So like, how does the version I was using before relate to this new hash? Which, I mean, ironically, with Git, you can do that very easily. So you can see the changes, see what has happened. And since we have all of these AST tools and all this like semantic analysis tools, it could actually tell you a bit of how the code has changed, highlight different parts of it for you. You could have all of this extra information about your dependencies that tell you, is this compatible with what I'm using? But like we've thrown all that away so we can get this 3-number magic thing that kind of doesn't ever actually work and is really mutable and is really just a pointer. But it's like, no, what you should be doing is encouraging people to actually look at their dependencies and look how things are changing over time, which our main version control system gives us. But you don't even have to use the main version control system for that, because if you just have tarballs of things, you just tarball, diff it, run it through the thing to be like, okay, here's what's different. Here's what has changed. And that would be so much more of a secure thing. And it isn't as high overhead as any of the stuff that we're doing now.
No,
but that would once again,
we just need to switch to Windows version numbers with 4 tokens instead of 3.
That 4th token makes all the difference.
The extra token. But it's like, and this is what bothers me about like the path that Go took. Because Go had, with GoPath, there were problems. I will say there were reproducible builds. Like I had a coworker once have to painstakingly go through Git histories to find the versions of something to build some 2-year-old thing. It was an absolute mess. So this was a problem for sure. But like Go was in this really unique position and had this different way of looking at both like units of code, like packages, I feel like were a beautiful unit of code. And this domain thing, the use of domain names to actually try and do something new, try and do something innovative. And if it didn't work, okay, sure, it didn't work, but you tried. Instead, we tried to bandwagon on top of it what everybody else was doing, and it just has been like such a mess. And that I'm so sad for that. Like I'm sad that the world has one more Me Too language instead of like an innovative, distinctive language, right? Yeah. Go doing this reduced the diversity of languages that exist. And I think that's just a sad loss for the world.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, like,
to that point, before we kind of start wrapping up, I'm reminded of there was a proposal for what amounted to optional semantic import versioning. It was very well thought out, very well documented. What it amounted to was not everyone needs to do that. It should be possible to, kind of like you've been saying, Chris, to do something different. And here's a proposal to make /v2 optional. And there was a ton of discussion that went on for months. And finally, he who must not be named came in and said, no, we're not doing that, and summarily closed it.
Yeah.
I was going to say, before we get on to the question of is Go dead, any more points on the module discussion? I see there's a lot of notes here. Jamie, anything you want to say before we answer that question?
No, I'm just picturing what being like.
Oh no! We're done. Where's the cease and desist? It's coming. It's coming.
No, it's okay. I'll just ding it out.
You should not be ding. Oh man.
No, I mean,
there's so many of those things where it's like we could have done such a better job and we just didn't.
And I want to say too, one of the things that's bothered me for years, and I've kind of talked about in private with people, but the community of Go is also not the community that I joined when I first started writing Go, because there's a lot of people, like you can name a few, right? You have like some that are still around. We still have Bill Kennedy, but like Dave Cheney, Blake Mizrarini, Kelsey Hightower, Jess Frizzell, Sam Boyer, Peter Burgon. There's a lot of people that were very vocal in the Go community. They pushed back on a lot of things. They engaged in a lot of debate, and they're all gone now. Those people are not in the Go community pretty much at all. They're right. Off doing other things. And there hasn't really been anybody that's stepped up to take their place, right? Like, there isn't anybody that's providing that same amount of, I think, pushback onto the Go team. And I think that makes our community worse. I think we literally remove diversity from the community. We've removed diversity of thought. And I think it's interesting that like every Go event and everything has this code of conduct that's like, we support diversity. We want diversity. And it's like, well, where diversity was literally the most important thing, you have failed. Yeah. You have failed tremendously. And my question would be, are you going to stop doing lip service to this idea of diversity and actually do things that make it so that people can speak up and that they're not afraid of getting either shouted down by people in power or banned from the community forever, right? Like, what is going to happen to actually repair that? Because if that doesn't happen, then not only is the language dead, the community is basically dead. Who wants to be a part of a community of people that are just, where you have to just whisper about all your complaints in private and they're never going to get fixed because you can't actually bring them up. And anytime you try, you get shouted down in the comments, shouted in the issue queue, you get summarily dismissed. They close things. They won't, like, how are we going to fix this?
I wasn't there in the early stages of the Go community, but do you think that these people left because of the paternalism, or like the paternalism rose because these people left, or is it more blurry than that?
I think it's a little more blurry than that, but I think it actually, I don't know if it's more blurry than that. I think it is. I can't speak for these people.
Right.
I can only speak on what I've observed, and what I've observed from reading, open issue queues, all of that, is that, the amount of paternalism, the amount of being told, no, you're wrong without justification, or the amount of being like, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm in power, so I get to do what I want, drove those people away. And I don't blame them. Like, this is something they were doing for free. They're not getting paid for it. It frustrates me so much that the people that are getting paid to do this, that are in these positions of power, that have this immense responsibility to be leaders and to hear their community and to lead their community, see themselves as equal to the community, that they can get in the pit and shout down with them. But it's like, no, you have a higher responsibility because you are a leader. And they have it feels like that responsibility has been abdicated. And we did just have the big change in Go's leadership. So I'm hoping that with that, we can maybe undo some of this, or there will be space for more, for more people to disagree and not get shouted down, for more space to have healthy conversations. But I just don't know. And I mean, for me too, I mean, we talk about this in our interview that we're going to ship next week. I don't know if I want to stick around to find out anymore. Like, I don't know, like, this language does not give me joy anymore to write. This language does not make me feel like I felt when I first started writing it. And part of that's the community, and part of it is all these changes that have been made to the language. But it just doesn't feel like a language that I could build the things that I want to build in, which makes me very, very sad. And I feel like more and more people are feeling that way.
It's still better than writing Java.
Well, it can always be worse, Dylan. It can always be worse.
So it's kind of to that point, like, what drew me into the Go community was kind of the simplicity. I spent a lot of time in C++ and the .NET world and C# and a little bit of Java, and it was built around these very verbose, very arcane OOP languages with thousands of constructs in the language, and it took years to master. And I essentially learned Go in a month. And I think we still have that to an extent. There's still simplicity as a core value in a lot of the Go community. There's still kind of inherent pushback on, kind of like you said, the why doesn't Go have exceptions? Because what we have works, and it's simple. So I don't think all is lost. We still have those nuggets of core values of simplicity and doing things because it's the right thing to do, and kind of supporting everyone else. But at the same time, and I've been in the same boat as you over the last couple of years, Chris, kind of, for lack of a better term, disappointed in the Go leadership, kind of being aloof, and the community feeling like we're shouting into the void as we bring up these issues, these impedance mismatches between what Go has given us and the way that we actually need to work. So I'm hopeful that the new leadership will give, like you said, will give some space to maybe start addressing some of those things. But we'll have to wait and see.
I want to say something really quick before I turn it over to Jamie to ask, if Go's dead. Really, one thing real quick. There's a line in our notes that says modules are terrible. And like, we didn't talk about this before, but the whole V2 mechanism of modules, I think, promotes modules staying on V1 or V0 too much. And it doesn't give like maintainers the ability to go to V2, V3, V4. And I think it was a mistake. So I just wanted to put that on the record and say that's a mistake. And then for the Go, is the Go dead stuff? My quick perspective is, I used to read these posts from people like, I love Go, I hate Go, or I'm done with Go, or whatever. All these posts out there that were, saying like why they're leaving Go or whatever. And when I read those posts back in the day, I was like, oh, they're just bitter or they're wrong. And now I revisited those posts and I revisited the GitHub discussions, and I'm like, wow, they had a point. And that's pretty much what I'll say on the Go is dead topic, right? I like the language, but I can see where these people that made these such posts come from, and I can see that leadership in Go was not the absolute, do no wrong. And yeah, much like Chris, I'm getting a little tired of it in that sense. So, Jamie, Go dead? Is it dead or not?
I don't know. Yeah, like it's some interesting thoughts, interesting point of views. I've not been as close to like the Go community at large, and also like understanding the flow of the language up until like more recent years. After which, like a lot of the big shifts have happened. For instance, like I was fortunate to join Go after modules landed because I didn't have to deal with which of the tools do we use and everything. It was just like we use modules, that's it. And so from my point of view, like I'm hearing your very, very valid thoughts about what modules is like. And it's interesting because like I haven't tried anything else, but I have worked in other languages and other ecosystems that move a little bit slower, that move a hell of a lot faster, and are constantly breaking things and changing things. And it's like, oh God, I've been away for a week. Like, how many new things do I need to pick up before I can like get my code compiling? I don't know. I'm hopeful rather than more pessimistic, but I guess maybe we can revisit this in a year and see if there is a fork. Or
I will say that, like, when I say dead, it's not like Go's going to go away, right? Go's still extremely important to us as an industry. It's going to continue, but I think it's just like it's not going to be. I mean, I feel like it's probably going to be like what PHP was like for years, where it was there, it was still heavily used, but it was just kind of like, eh. And like people use it because they had to use it, not because they were super excited about it or they really wanted to use it. And I think, what Laravel did and what Composer did and what the newer versions of PHP did, I think really reignited a community. And they're doing more interesting things and they're building cooler things. And I was there for part of that with like Symfony into Laravel and all of that. And I think there's space for that to happen again with, say Go. But I think for right now, it just feels like with every release of Go, with every new project I start, I'm just like, why am I writing it in this language? What is this language giving me? I feel like I'm fighting with so many tools. It just doesn't. I don't feel excited about writing Go. I'm like, okay, well, I just got to build a project, so I guess this is what I'm going to build it in.
Jamie, I know.
I
know you have a hard stop real quick, Jamie. So I wanted to thank you real quick for coming on. I think us three are going to stay on and chat a little bit more because I see Chris's eyes. There's still more to get out of him. But no, thank you so much for coming on, Jamie. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I was going to say on that last note, I've immediately forgotten where I was going to go with that. What did you just say, Chris?
Oh, I just said like it's not exciting to write Go anymore, and it's kind of the language is going to die. It's just gonna be floating around, right? It's not
finding it hard to choose Go for new projects, things of that nature.
Yeah, like I don't. Yeah,
I guess like at the same time, it is nice to have like a boring-ish language that's kind of like a safe bet to go with. As you say, it's not super exciting, but you are also finding like there are things coming to the language that you're like, do I really want this? So maybe it's not necessarily as good.
Yeah, I think there's some level of calcification going on, for lack of a better term. Like it's grown to the point where major things any significant change is going to upset some large section of the community. So it inherently becomes limiting. But at the same time, I still like Go for its simplicity, for its straightforwardness. And we mentioned in a couple of past episodes, like I've tried to go learn Rust because it's the new hotness.
Okay.
And I just don't like it. It's hard to think about. And at this point in my career, I don't want to have to think hard about the code that I'm writing because I'm trying to solve a problem. I'm not trying to explore the boundaries of computer science.
Yeah. And I think, Go's still, I think it's still gonna be used a lot. I think it's gonna be very, very popular. But I do think it's ceded so much ground already to so many. Like a lot of people are not writing web services in Go, and that used to be like running a web service, gonna do it in Go. There used to be a lot of things that was like, oh, you're gonna do that? Okay, you should write it in Go. And it's just like it doesn't feel like it's that anymore. It feels like that ground just got ceded because of, instead of keeping up with those things, we just did all this other stuff. And I think that I think it's something that people have to make a decision for on their own. Once again, being dead does not mean it's going away, but definitely for me, it's just like I find myself wanting to do things that I feel like I should be able to do with Go, especially low level stuff. And there's a whole community of people that are fighting for it. Like, why is TinyGo not part of the Go project? Right? We brought the Windows port in. Why are embedded devices getting less support than Windows? Like, why aren't we bringing new things in? Why aren't we putting more effort into these other communities? Why is it that we don't seem to care about them as much? I mean, but at the end of the day, it's like I'm not done with writing Go as of today, right? Like I love the language. It's still gonna be stuff I write and Go. It's just like I don't think it's gonna be my
and he was done writing Go. No.
I was going to say,
it's not gonna be my primary
Narrator.
language.
And 3 weeks later, he published his "I'm Done with Go" blog.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jamie. Sorry.
I am eagerly waiting for next week's interview, which you recorded yesterday, because I want to know what happened. Because massive shift.
Oh yeah.
Life-changing interview. Yeah.
I mean, I think really what it was is that the guest kind of just gave us permission to be done with Go if we wanted to be done with Go.
Yeah.
Because it's like the guest is, we'll talk about it at the end of the episode, but he is one of the most notable people that has written Go that the community's ever seen. And
in a sense, Go royalty.
Yeah. And he's just straight up like, I don't think I could ever write Go again. Right. And I think when someone like that says something like that, it's like, oh, even though Go has been part of my identity for so long, you can let things go. They don't have to be part of your identity forever. I enjoyed the time it was part of who I was and what I did. And now it's just, right, it's going to be there, but it's not part of who I am anymore. It's like, I don't have any desire to defend Go to my friends who are like, oh, or to anybody that says it. It's just like, no. You don't like it? Okay, don't write it.
I used to go.
Oh my God.
And we have a
Sorry,
new
it
soundbite.
came right into my head. I had to say it. I had to get it on.
And we have a new soundbite. That was great.
Chris is like, okay, what timestamp was this? I'm getting
Oh my
this.
God. I'm going to hear this in editing and just start laughing so hard.
Yeah. So for me, I think Go was my 13th or 14th language that I used professionally.
Okay, dinosaur.
Yes, I've been around for a long time. I've done a lot of things. So kind of the same. I'm not I've never thought of Go as part of my identity. But Go is the language that I'm using. If that changes, that changes. But I am satisfied with Go because it fills my needs, and it doesn't require me to think at the level that Rust or Zig does. I tend to not do those lower level projects. So Go's not perfect, but it's also not part of my identity. I enjoy writing Go still. I enjoy the community. have every year gotten to be a bigger part of GopherCon. In some sense, I'm recognizable now. So there's that aspect of it. I still enjoy the community, but if Go stagnates and I have to pivot to something else, then that happens. Like, I'm not only a Go developer.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, I hate Go. It's dead to me. I'm never going to go for con. I think everything Go related should die. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say that because I don't believe that. I'm a little just upset with where Go is today and that it didn't, it like let other languages kind of steal its thunder and steal its ground, so to speak. And while Go was focusing on issues that really didn't push the language forward, you know, like we spoke about in this episode of the module system, module proxy, things of that nature, generics. Like, you focus on these things that, did you really move the language forward in meaningful ways for the community instead of like doubling down on like getting TinyGo accepted into the Go and focusing on embedded devices and, you know, compile targets and all that stuff? Like, you could have made the language like more solidified in where it was and kept that niche going, but instead you chose violence, I guess. No, no, it's just, it makes me sad. And I'm with Chris here on this. Like, I'm doing a bunch of like Kubernetes stuff at work, like making integrations for Kubernetes and like maintaining our Terraform provider and such. And it's like, I'm forced to write Go there and I don't really want to, you know, but I kind of have to write Go in those scenarios, but I wish I didn't have to, you know. That's kind of my feelings right now.
Yeah. It feels weird because it is, I think the thing I'm most sad about is all of that opportunity loss. Like, I think that's what frustrates me the most. That's what just makes it feel like there should be something that, I don't know. It just makes me feel like we could have been so much more and we should have been so much more and we were destined to be so much more. And then we just didn't. And I think, you know, if we kind of get in more of the nuance of it, I feel like there wasn't a good reason why, right? It's not like the community as a whole was just like laid back and then all of this stuff happened and we all realized in retrospect that, oh, this stuff isn't great. Like, people were fighting so hard for years and years and years, and this stuff still happened.
Yeah.
And I think too, it's like, I mean, he was like, at the end of it, everybody, when, you know, the leadership transition happened, everybody was like, thanks for your hard work. And I was just like, you did some good things. There were some great things that happened. There was a lot of not great things that happened. And I feel like even on the way out, we didn't really express. It felt like lip service. It felt like lip service. It felt like just an ignoring of what had happened. And I don't know if we as a community will ever reconcile with that. I mean, people have already forgotten so much of what has happened. Like, I was talking to people at GopherCon last year, and they're like, oh yeah, I forgot about that and that and that and that and that and that. Because they tried to tell me like, oh no, modules has been great from the beginning. And I was like,
no,
what about
it was not
all of this stuff? And then they're like, oh, I forgot about all of those things. And I think, like, if you don't write down your history, if you don't talk about your history, if you don't actually push back and challenge things, you're just going to be doomed to repeat it. You're not going to be able to learn, not going to be able to grow. New people will come in. They won't know that any of this has happened. And, you know, everything's going to be worse overall. So it's hard to talk about this. Like, I debated so many times whether I ever wanted to talk about any of this, because it's just like, well, what's the point at this point? But I think it is important to record in some fashion all of this, especially now that it's not just some hypothetical problems, but like, this could really do damage to people and to the language.
Yeah.
That this is not, it's not a vulnerability. It's a feature. It's a thing that is unfixable in the language, baked directly into it.
It is behaving exactly as designed.
Yes.
Designed by you, who didn't get the community a chance to like help.
Yeah.
Right? You didn't give the community that proper chance to help you design it better.
Yeah. So it's just,
I think frustrating is the appropriate word.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a weird, tendency in this in life really, but in this tech industry more so, we kind of avoid quote unquote conflict, or we avoid any sort of like feedback or critical feedback specifically, right? Not like praise. Praise is the easy one. I'm talking about the critical feedback of like, hey, Chris, I really don't like the way you published that package and da-da-da. Like we avoid that. And so much so that like we don't even have the discussions, right? Here's what happens. You go, Chris, you maintain a project, right? I go to your project and say, hey, Chris, I don't like the direction you're taking, this, and that. I have some use cases for this, and I really want to see if I can help you with it. And you're like, nah, screw that. I'm closing this discussion, right? Mm-hmm. That the people in power generally do that, right? They close the discussion. And not only do they just close the discussion, they say, oh, if you don't like it, go fork it. And it's like, that's it. And that's where the discussion ends. We don't have a discussion about like what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong, what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong. We just kind of say, it's open source code, go do whatever you want, leave me alone. And we're missing all of that discussion that can help build the community and make it better. Sometimes you have to look at somebody and point out like, actually you're being kind of a jerk, or you're not doing this correctly, or you have to have that discussion, that little heart to heart or whatever. And we don't allow that to happen in a lot of these open source communities. And it's a bad thing, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that will ever really solve that push and pull, because it's open source. It's free. You're not actually on the hook to support everyone's use case. But that's at the same time, it's part of being a community that you've put it out there, and you should at least be accepting of other people's input and not dismissive.
I agree with the toy projects, but when you're talking about like a programming language where there's like an elected or not elected, I don't know how the leadership is determined, but there's like a leadership for that. You do have a responsibility now. You can't just say like it's open source and just do whatever you want. You're the leader of the thing. I'm looking to you for like guidance and whatnot. I have opinions about your leadership and I want to work with you. You can't just say, oh, if you don't like it, go fork. You have to acknowledge your position as a leader and take that feedback. And I'm sure Chris has more.
Like back, I remember like when Rob Pike was leading everything, there were so many times when he was like, we really should do this. And then people made really good arguments about why we shouldn't. And he was just like, I don't agree with you, but clearly this is not something that we have consensus on. And he would drop it and we'd move on to other things. And I feel like that has not happened in the last 8 years or so. Like, I feel like if there's something that one of the people in a position of power wants to do, that it's like almost predetermined. It takes, like, I mean, I don't know if you guys remember from a couple years ago, the whole try thing, when they were like, we're going to do it. And Bill Kennedy had to write this big blog post.
I remember.
Being like, had to basically set everything on fire and be like, this is going to destroy so many businesses if you do this. This is going to make everything. He had to put all his political energy into getting that thing to stop. And the whole entire, I mean, there was lots of opposition. It was so much overwhelming opposition. And that's like the one instance where I think it actually wound up stopping something like that. And it's just like, it shouldn't be this way. I shouldn't have to go through and like dig through a whole discussion and be like, okay, well, was everybody really considered or blah, blah. Like I should be like, if you're going to be a leader of any type, as you mentioned, like you have a different thing that you need to do. You're not just a community member anymore. You are not just one of the people. You have to listen to not just the bulk, but everybody and balance what everybody says. And you have to have confidence. And you can't say, oh, our data shows that you're wrong. I don't care about your data. I don't trust your data. I want you as a leader to be able to say, I've looked at the data, I've looked at the opinions, I've looked at this, I've looked at that. Here's the decision, and here is why. And to defer, at the end of the day, to not doing something right now. If there's a lot of opposition, that's what Go was, right? Go was always no, yes is forever, no is for now. So if you said no for now, we could have said no for now in a lot of things. We have said no for now in a lot of things. And that has led us to not implement some things that could have been disasters. But we haven't been doing that as much. And that's what's frustrating, right? That's what's annoying. And I've kind of tried to bring this up before of like leadership, we should be better at this. And it's just, I mean, once again, it's really early days for Austin and for Cherry. And I hope that with their new regime comes a lot of change, and I'm perfectly happy to be wrong about all of this and to see that vibrancy of the Go community come back.
Agreed.
But I don't think that's going to happen if no one speaks up, and I'm kind of tired of not speaking up, so that's why I'm speaking up now.
Yeah, and it's perfectly fine as a leader for you to say, listen, I've listened to your discussion points, I've weighed all the evidence and everything, right? I've seen everything, I've heard it, but here's the vision we're setting for this project, and this is where we're going. Like, I know it's going to piss off a lot of you, but this is still the direction we're going. Like, you don't have to fold to the community, you don't have to defer, and you don't have to like push your own way. Like, you have options is what I'm trying to say, right? You don't have to always default to that single option. You can choose a different option depending on the discussion.
Like where things break down is when it becomes dismissive. Kind of like on the proposal that I was talking about earlier. Like, there were dozens of people over months having lots of discussion around this idea and different forks and different ideas for how it could be implemented or how it could work. And, well, that's not going to work for this. That's not going to go here. And then for someone on the Go team to just come in and with a drive-by comment, no, we're not doing that. Closed.
Yeah. Just the deep irony of that as well. And like, Go purports that it wants to be an inclusive community, a diverse community. And part of being inclusive is not saying your problems don't matter, which when you do just close an issue like that, or I saw a post once, like literally, where people were saying, hey, I'm having this issue. And there were like about a dozen or so of them, maybe 2 dozen. And then one of the Go team members comes in and says, well, our survey data says that this isn't a problem, and closes it. And I'm like, that's just 2 dozen people that told you that this is a problem, that this thing you're doing is hurting them. And you said to them, well, your hurt doesn't matter because most people don't have that problem.
Yep.
That is extremely uninclusive. And it's just...
And like, those were just the people that made the effort to go tell you.
There's
that
tons of other
problem.
people that are having the same issue. Like, if you get that much, even 2 dozen responses, 2 dozen people,
that's a lot. That's a lot of people.
That means it's a really widespread problem.
Yeah. If it's one person kind of ranting and they're in some very fringe thing, then okay, there's some grounds for, yes, I hear you, but we're not going to deal with that.
Yeah. But once it's multiple people.
Yeah.
And yeah,
even a recent example, the automatic toolchain updates became a Lego in the dark for us.
Yeah,
because some random transitive dependency number 618 of 783 decided to change their Go line to 1.22. And all of a sudden, our CI stops building. It's like, no, this is bad. We need to be able to turn this off, opt into it.
Yeah.
Is there a Go language roadmap or something of where like the vision for Go is set out, or like the explicit values of Go or things are set out?
I mean, there are the Go values.
Okay.
That was part of the whole brand redesign, or I guess brand establishment thing they did. I don't know if there's a roadmap. I think there's a roadmap probably in GitHub somewhere.
Okay, I gotta take a look at that, because I think part of it is that too. A lot of these open source projects that are load bearing, right? Like programming languages, very, very critical libraries, kernels, whatever. Like a lot of these very load bearing projects, I think they don't do their community justice because they don't set like a roadmap, or they don't kind of like write down the values that can be used in these situations when we're disagreeing or where we don't have consensus. We can like refer to these things and say, hey, here's kind of like our order. Here's like our priority of what this language is going to be like, or this project's going to be like. And unfortunately, Chris, your point of view is like lower on that priority than my point of view because I'm like aligning with this value. Like at least you can point to something is what I'm trying to say, you know? And I think the lack of having those things written down is why a lot of these discussions just end with closing this, don't care, right? Or like, oh, sorry, 2 dozen people, you don't hurt, you know, like, sorry. Right. I think that's why this kind of happens too.
And I'll say too, it's just like, I mean, that DEI point, which I know DEI is like a super hot topic thing right now. It's like all over the place. Yeah. But I think the thing, especially as like a Black queer person, that frustrates me about this more than anything is people that want to sit there and be like, oh yeah, we're being super, super duper inclusive, or we're trying to be inclusive. We care about this. And then when you go and you point out, here are the ways you're not being inclusive, and then the behavior doesn't change, I think that's what frustrates me. I'm like, I don't want
the behavior not even doesn't change, it doesn't get acknowledged.
Well, yeah. I don't want the performative inclusion, right? I don't.
Yeah, that was what just kind of what I was thinking from there is a lot of that has a tendency to be, from what I've seen, to be performative, to be superficial. It's more important to appear inclusive than to actually be inclusive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's where some of this frustration comes from as well. Is that you're feigning, right? I mean, like, the community did something that I still think is just egregious by saying we're banning you for life. And that was probably one of the most uninclusive things I've seen a community do, where it's like, you are saying that this person is irredeemable. You're saying what they've done is so terrible that there's no amount of change that could ever happen to the person. Not in a year, not in a decade, not in a century, if they live that long. That would redeem them to come back to this community.
10,000 years when humans were tribes wandering the plains, and you ostracize people and sorry, go out and let the wolves eat you.
The thing about it is when you actually go back and you look at the situation, I sat down, I looked at the situation, and I was like, there are other people that were doing the same thing, and they're still here.
Yeah.
They're still, so what is this? This is an unfair rule applied.
I was kind of a partial participant in that whole scenario. And I will admit, that person who got banned was being an asshole.
Oh, for sure.
Absolutely. But like you said, that doesn't mean they can not be allowed to write Go anymore.
Yeah. And it's, if you're going to do that, you have to do it fairly. And they just, it was so arbitrary. And I'm just like, if you want to be inclusive, you can't say that. And this is what irks me about so much of this, is that, like, I know you all, like, it's uncomfortable to have to say, yeah, this person's a jerk, but we're not throwing away people. We're not going to say you are a bad human for life. Because I'll tell you what, when you start doing that, I know this history. I've seen this history play out, right? I've studied history. Like, as soon as you start doing that to people, there's a certain subset of people that will get it done to them more than everybody else.
Correct.
And those communities know. And what are those communities going to do? They're going to protect themselves. They're going to say, oh, this happened over here? Whoa.
I'm not going there.
Don't go over there, my people. Don't go over there. Don't go to that place. Here's a better place. So it's not even that this is just like a singular thing and that's all. It's like, no, this will have echoes for a very long time. And I don't think that was probably thought of in the moment or taken into account. And it's like, it's also like, how do we even get here? Why are we here? Why is this person being a jerk? Why
it follows the same pattern of closing discussions, right? That's because that's what they did. Yes. That's essentially what they did when they banned this person. It's like, goodbye, you're done. You can never come back. This topic's closed. It's like,
that
you didn't
person
solve anything.
Escalated to the vitriol that was going on because the points that they were making were being dismissed.
Yeah. And I will say, he was a part of a group of people, and every single one of those other people is gone. He was the last one standing. And then they're like, goodbye. And it's just like, it's so frustrating to me that on the one hand, you have that being done and us being told, well, this needed to happen because this was detrimental to the community. And on the other hand, you have all of the stuff that's happened that is absolutely detrimental to the community. Right? Once again, because someone wanted to push their ideas so hard and they were in a position of power to do so, they drove, once again, in my estimation, it's probably more nuanced than this, but they drove people out of the community, and that the thing they were driving for wound up being a mass after mass after mass after mass, and now has led to a vulnerability
Vulnerabilities,
that's
yep.
going to be so difficult to solve, and it's a massive security hole that's just going to require every co-engineer to be way more diligent. And with us using more and more AI for things, where AI is doing this, and all of us using tooling that just writes our imports for us, the language just became so much more complex.
Yep.
Right, which goes back to my original point of like, I came here for a simple language. Now this is all more complex. Now this is more difficult. Now I have to have more mental overload. Now I have to be more diligent. And now if I want to go bring up an issue, I have to say, do I want to go deal with whatever might happen in the issue queue? Do I want to have to deal with potentially being told, what you said don't matter, close. Oh, where our data is saying that this is a problem, close. The fact that I even have to think about dealing with that is just so, it's so heavy.
Yeah.
And that's feeding into part of the reason why I'm just like, I want to do something else. I don't want to have to do this. I don't want to deal with this.
When I see a community treat someone as irredeemable, because you mentioned basically he was banned for life, irredeemable, all of that. That is a big red flag to me personally, because I'm someone that believes in like redemption and second chances and forgiveness and all that stuff. And when I see people wave the ban hammer around like it's a toy, I question the values of that community heavily. Because the guests we spoke to yesterday, like I asked them a question about, hey, you don't block or ban anyone, like what's up? And we talked about that a little bit.
Yeah.
And I agree with that position. I don't believe you should just block or ban whoever you don't want to hear from, or when they say the hard things or whatever. Like, you shouldn't do that. You should have some level of tough skin. You should welcome some level of discourse to where you can like have that discussion. And even so, like, even if you disagree with somebody, there's been times where the person that I've like loathed or had a tight disagreement with and I was just mad at, after we've like talked it out and did our thing, we became great friends, or we became great colleagues or whatever. And it was an amazing relationship after that, because we were able to see that discussion through to the end. And if you don't let that happen, and if you just quick to ban someone or whatever, you never get that. And I'm not sitting here saying you shouldn't like give people consequences for their actions. That is not what I'm saying. You should do that, but it doesn't have to be a permanent lifetime ban. You can say, hey, you're done for 2 weeks,
or
come back.
A temporary ban would have been absolutely valid in that case. Like, okay, things have gotten out of hand. It's escalated to insults and very personal attacks.
You watch like a movie
and like, okay, you need to cool off. Take a break.
Yeah. We see it all the time in culture and movies, right? Where someone's like, they're the hot-headed person coming on things and they do something and it harms the team or whatever. And like the person in charge says, listen, you're done today. Get out. Come back when your head's right.
Right.
You're not lifetime banned. You're getting consequences for your actions, but you're not lifetime banned. You are welcome back to this community when you get your crap together. But I will not ban you forever and see that you're a horrible person forever. I would not do that, because I believe in change. But also, you're drawing a line where actions are not like acceptable.
I'll also say that anytime something like this happens, you have to sit there and say this is a failure of leadership, and you have to prove that as an incorrect hypothesis. Like, if there's vitriol, if there's anger, if there's hatred, if there's insults, if there's any of that, you have to look at the top and you have to say, we're going to assume that this is your fault. And you're going to have to show us why this is not your fault, because you are the one that is setting the direction for everything. You're the one that's setting the discourse. You're the one that is setting the mood for how everybody is. And if we can look and say, okay, well, yes, you did not do things wrong here. You have set a really great tone. It's all good. This person, here's the reasons why they were doing it. Not good. Okay, we're going to remove them for a while. If that was the process, I would have many fewer problems. But my problem is that there's such a severe action was taken, and there was no public accountability for leadership. Like, maybe something happened behind the scenes. Maybe they had to sit down with people and were like, this can't happen. But like, that basically doesn't exist if the public doesn't know about it. If the public doesn't know that leadership was held accountable. Because now I have to sit here and assume that those conversations didn't happen, that there were no repercussions for people in leadership.
But Chris, can we take this to DMs, please? Because, we need to talk about this in private. Excuse me, sir.
Right?
That's really that's what happens. That's honestly what happens at the end of the day.
It's like, okay, you had this very public punishment for this one person, but then everything else got to be in private. And lots of time too, like, this system hides behind that, right? It's like, oh, our code of conduct committee, they handle everything in private to protect people's privacy and all of that. And it's just like, okay, but how do we know that you're actually doing things in an accountable way? How do we know that you're being fair? How do we know that you're being inclusive? How do we know that this isn't, I mean, in this case, it definitely wasn't like a race or gender or sexuality thing, but like, how do we know that that wasn't the case? Like, if you ever do this again, how do we know that that's not what happened here? How do we know that prejudice in it? How do we audit that? Right? How do we hold the community responsible for the values it says it has? Like,
at a minimum, there was personal animus involved.
Yes.
Because it escalated to like personal insults back and forth and some very nasty stuff.
And once again, it's like, if you want to banhammer people, all right, but you need to apply that banhammer equally across the board.
Yeah,
that did not
needs
happen.
it needs to be objective. It can't be like, oh, we don't like that person now.
Yeah. So it's like, if you want a banhammer, then you have to show that why you're banhammering. And honestly, any ban more than 5 years is egregious. Yeah. Any ban over 5 years is egregious. Like, you should not be doing that. That should not be how we, in the open communities we have, that should just not be an option.
You can't simultaneously say that I'm a different person than I was 5 years ago and then say you're banned for life. Like, because then by definition, you don't believe that people can change, is what you're saying.
You don't believe that people, which, you know, if you're going to have that position, and you're going to have to make a whole lot of different decisions about how everything gets run and how people.
And like, what's the worst case? The person comes back into the community after the end time period of the temporary ban or whatever, and they didn't change, and then you just give them another one. See you in 10 years then. You know what I mean? Like, bye.
And this is the thing too. I'll say this as we start to wrap up. I have a friend that's an auditor. And they've been an auditor for more than 2 decades at this point. And they audit, they work in the medical device and medical tech space. So they're going in and making sure that like the products we're all buying on the shelves are like actually as safe as they should be and all of that. And the thing they always say to me is that you never blame the person. You always blame the system. So if there's somebody that is doing something incorrectly, you don't go, you're wrong, you're fired. You say, what in this system allowed them to do that? What in the system, then we should apply that here. What in the system allowed people to behave in this way? What in the system caused that person to behave this way or caused this person to do that? And then you look at that and you say, how do we fix the system so that this doesn't happen? You can ban that person for a little bit. You can say, we got in the situation. It's not great we got in the situation. We all got to reconfigure everything right now. So you're going to go over there for right now. But then you have to say, okay, what in our system failed? And then you say, we're going to fix this, and we're going to be public about it, and we're going to publish something about it, and we're going to have it so that people can hold us accountable, and so that this doesn't happen again.
The how did we get here part is important.
Right, because there's nothing that will prevent this from happening again in the future.
Right.
There's nothing that will prevent someone from getting to the level that that person got to in the future, which is like, if your goal is to make this an inclusive community, that should have never happened in the first place. Yeah. So you should make sure it never happens again.
I've personally removed myself from conversations because I felt it getting there. Like, okay, this is getting ugly, and we're not talking about abstract concepts anymore. Now it's no, you're stupid and shut up, and like, okay, well, I'm going to leave because it's going to escalate and it's going to get ugly.
Right. Yeah. So there's a lot. There's a lot that's this episode started in a very different
No,
place.
it's good. I think it's good because
it meshes. I think it meshes with a lot of the conversations that you and I, Chris, have had over the last couple of years at GopherCon, when we spent an entire day hallway tracking and having these conversations and ranting about these sharp edges that were not being addressed and the dismissiveness of the Go team as people were raising these concerns. And it's kind of, like you said, this is the culmination of a long string of things that have gotten to the point where Go is serving vulnerable code and you can't actually stop it.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Like this topic that we're on now is relevant to our module topic because we're asking vulnerable. The module proxy is serving vulnerable code. What about the system is wrong that we got here? And this is part of that, right? This is part about what the system is wrong of how we got here. And I think this topic is relevant. Sure, it's not specific about the modular proxy, but it helps answer the question of like, here's all the things that the system did or didn't do of how we even got here in the first place. And here's some background for you, listener, if you want to, hear it for yourself.
Effectively, we just did a root cause analysis. We
Essentially,
traced the thread all the way through. And once again, there's nuance in all of this. There's going to be different perspectives on all of this. But I think that this is the conversation we got to be having as a community, because there's just so much that needs to get fixed. So yeah, I think it's, in a way, Go is dead, but it's not beyond revival.
Correct.
We can get that vibrant community back. We can get once again, you can fix all of this. You can go and rip modules out if you wanted to. You could rip Civ out if you wanted to and replace it with like the bill of materials model I said, or another model based on content hashes. You can go back and you can invest in TinyGo and WebAssembly. You can write a runtime spec and start making subsystems out of it so you can use it in more varied environments. You can start prioritizing being able to make libraries with Go. You can do all of these things. It's not done. We can always do that. We can regain and grow the community and make it vibrant and make people excited. But we have to acknowledge that A, it's not there right now. We have to ask ourselves what got us to be not there right now, and then make a plan for how we can get to the place we want to be. So I think that's what we should do. And I don't think it's ever going to happen if no one says anything. If no one gets up in public and says, this is a problem, let's fix it.
Don't be a lurker. Try to speak up when you can, especially those that have like more privilege than others to do it. Honestly, you have to do it. Because like, look, the example you spoke about, Bill Kennedy, like with the try thing, other people spoke up about it, but Bill had to get up and speak about it from his position of privilege, and also put his company's reputation on the line too, right? Because he's not speaking just on himself, but he also makes money with Go. So there's that aspect. It shouldn't take that for people to listen to what's going on. So don't lurk, speak up.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
Take that sigh of relief.
Right.
Okay. Well, I have a fun post editing task. This is going to be post-production. It's going to be so much fun on this.
And this was supposed to be a short episode.
Yeah, it was going to. Then everybody's hard stops became not hard stops. So, just train through that.
We have thoughts, we have thoughts. We care about Go enough to like try to at least get the thoughts out there. And, it's not like we're shitting on Go and like, oh, I hate Go forever. No, it's not that. It's the opposite.
The tagline is quickly morphing into random tangents about tech adjacent things.
Patching problems with paternalistic proxies, and we got to put more P's in there.
We have to do more P's. We should, PPOE. What is it? Point to point over. Yeah.
I will be so disappointed if we don't get Matt singing in the episode.
Oh yeah.
Why would I cut that out?
Perfect. We're aligned. Perfect.
It's not enough to get copyright stricken. So
that is a recurring.
True.
That is a recurring soundbite now.
I'm happy to provide sound bites. Don't you worry.
All right. Well, let's wrap this up. So thank you, listener. If you're still here, obviously you're still here because you're hearing my words or seeing my face. This was a long ride. I hope that you have gained something from this, gained some knowledge, gained some insight, maybe gotten fired up to help fix some of the things with the Go community. But yeah, thank you for sticking around. And as we announced at the end of the episode. So the episode that will ship next week, we have Mitchell Hashimoto on, and Matt and I had what feels like a fantastic conversation with him. It gets to some levels of depth that I don't know if other interviews with him have gotten to. So I'm super excited for that. And with that, any last words, Dylan, Matt, anything?
No. Thank you all for listening. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you all. If you have feedback, send it our way.
Please
email hello@fallthrough.fm, or you can reach out to us on socials. Give us your thoughts. How do you feel about all of this? Do you completely disagree with us? Do you agree with us? Are you super happy that someone finally said it? Are you like, your guys are completely wrong? let us know. With that,
We won't take it. We won't take it to DMs. Don't worry.
yeah, we won't take it to DMs. We'll talk about it in public.
Yes.
Yeah. With that, see ya.
Bye, everyone.